Hello and welcome to DAX for Humans. My name is Greg Deckler, and today we're going to be putting a couple different techniques that we've been covering in the past few videos. We're going to be putting them to use to solve a problem that you can run into with measures in table and matrix visualizations, otherwise known as the measure totals problem. Okay, so to begin with, we're working with the same data model as last time, and we have a simple table visualization summarized by item, and I have a sum total cost measure here, which is just the sum of the table total cost. As you can see, I have 23.94, 23.92, 14.97, 5.97, and that does indeed actually add up to 68.8. Now, I have a slight variation of this measure, sum total cost minus 2, where I'm taking the sum of the total cost and then subtracting 2 from the number. And so the way of explaining this is that, let's say for example, in our fictional grocery store, every time that we source an item, a new item, we have to go out and find a supplier. We have to make sure that that supplier follows quality standards, and we then have to negotiate terms and conditions for delivery. So all of that is an overhead cost, which we're just basically saying is $2 in our case. So when we do this in the same table, you can see that each of these rows is $2 less than the actual sum. So 14, 12, 5, 3, 23, 21, 23, 21. But our total line is now no longer the sum of these rows. It's just $2 less than the last total. So there's a logical explanation for this, which is in the total rows we've covered in previous videos, you have all of the rows in context. So when you sum all of those rows, you get 68.8. And then you subtract 2, and that gives you 66.8. So while there's a logical explanation for this, it's probably not what you were expecting. You might be thinking, well, that's a weird way for DAX to work. Well, it's not actually DAX. It's actually the way the table and matrix visualizations have been coded. So for example, if I have the same table, we get an answer for a total of 66.8, versus if I use a stacked visual, same information, we get our correct, quote-unquote correct, 60.8 total. So it's not really DAX's fault. It's really the way that the table and matrix visuals were coded within Power BI. So you might be wondering, how do we fix it? Well, we can use the techniques we've been covering in the last few videos to fix this measure totals problem. So the way it's done is we construct a virtual table, total sum total cost minus 2. So what we're doing is we're creating a virtual table called table, where we summarize our table by item, and then we're adding a column total cost minus 2, where we sum the total cost and then subtract 2. So the same as our measure. We then, in our result, we say if has one value table item, we just return our measure, our original measure, which just subtracted the 2 from the sum. Otherwise, we sum X across our table, our total cost minus 2 column that we created, and then return the result. And so as you can see, we return the same information, 21.94, 21.92, 12.97, 3.97, but our total is now fixed, where it's actually adding up these values. And to demonstrate that, how that's working, let me add in this right here. So as you can see, so all I've done in this measure is I'm using the toCSV function to return our table that we've calculated. And as you can see, for each of the rows, right, we only have one row because we have pickle, banana, grapefruit, cucumber. But in the total row, we have pickle, banana, grapefruit, and cucumber. And as you can see, our total cost column that we're calculating within our virtual table, total cost minus 2, we have 21.94, 21.94, 21.92, 21.92, 12.97, 12.97, and 3.97, etc. And so when we do a sum X across this, we get our 60.8. Now you might be thinking, and we've covered, and you'll see this maybe in some other documentation on DAX or other techniques, and we've also covered this technique. You might be tempted to not use summarize and use another technique like add columns. It's this function, this measure. So in this case, I'm creating a same virtual table. I'm adding columns. I'm using distinct table item, and then do a total cost minus 2, where I then have the sum total cost minus 2. And then I have very similar, I have if has one value, return our original measure, otherwise do a sum x across it. Unfortunately, it gives us a completely wrong number. And the reason for this is that this version of this measure has lost context between what is in the table, essentially, or how these table items relate to the total cost when I do this calculation, because, again, the total row has all rows in context. So for the pickle row in this virtual table, all rows are still in context. For the banana row, all rows are still in context. Grapefruit row, same thing. Cucumber row, same thing. And you can see that by how this measure, where we get this number. So where we get that number, so I bring up the calculator. So if we take 68.8, well, let's do this again, 68.8 minus 2, and then we multiply it by 4, we get our 267.2. So that's where that's coming from. And we can actually see that if we did a 2 CSV similarly on this table, you would see that each of the rows for pickle, banana, grapefruit, and cucumber all have the 66.8 as the total for that column that we have in this table, total cost minus 2 column. So that's how that gets calculated. Now there is a way to fix it. We have to essentially bring back into context these items and recreate that context in our total row, but it involves a function that we're just not ready to cover quite yet. Okay, so the same thing can be done and shown in our matrix visual. So in this case, I've create an ad hoc hierarchy of item, color, and then item. And you can see we run into the same problem with our original measure, sum total cost minus 2, where 3.97 and 21.94 does not equal up to 27.91. It should equal up to something a little less than 26. But luckily for us, using our total cost minus 2 measure, we actually get the right value for the summary rows as well as our total row. So 25.91 is the total of these two numbers. And we don't have the problem, obviously, for items that, or for item colors that only have one item in their row. Those work just fine. And so there is no one solution for measure totals in Power BI. But if you use these techniques as shown here, using a combination of creating a virtual table via summarize, using your has one value and a conditional if statement, and using SumX, you can solve pretty much most or all of your measure total problems. That's all for this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.